Imagine you are making a decision that could instantly trigger, or, well, I guess totally void a $10 million corporate contract.
Wow. No pressure, right?
Right. And millions of people are watching you do this, like live, second by second, just scrutinizing your every move. The pressure is absolutely suffocating.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an actual stress dream.
It really does. Now imagine you are doing this job entirely for free, and tomorrow morning you have to be back at your desk for your actual regular day job.
That is, it's just wild. You'd assume any organization dealing with that level of capital and, that much public scrutiny would have an ironclad, highly paid, totally permanent regulatory department.
But they don't, which is why we're here. Welcome to the deep dive. We are looking at a management landscape that, from the outside, looks totally professional. But underneath, it is balancing massive consequences on a totally temporary foundation.
It's a fascinating setup, honestly.
It really is. Today, we are exploring the hidden and sometimes completely disastrous risks of using volunteer or temporary staffing models for high-stakes decisions. And to really get a grip on this executive management risk, we are looking at a brilliant high-speed case study. It's an article titled Formula One's Stewarding Problem.
The contrast here makes it a perfect lens for anyone in leadership, really, because, you have this absolute pinnacle of engineering and finance, but they're relying on a deeply fragile human element at the very end of the chain.
Exactly. And for you listening, whether you are managing a team of independent contractors, or maybe you oversee like a volunteer board for a nonprofit, or you're just trying to build consistency in a fast-paced corporate environment, this deep dive is going to reveal why temporary teams can cause permanent consequences.
Yeah, it's super relevant across the board.
Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the trap here, we really have to look at how Formula One splits its operations right down the middle.
Right. So the structure itself is a classic separation of powers. On one side, you have the commercial rights holders, and their mandate is simply to grow the sport, handle the media, secure sponsorships, and basically just sell the entertainment product. I mean, they generate the revenue.
Then, completely walled off from that commercial machine, you have the sporting regulation, which is overseen by the FIA. They write the rules of the sport, and they actually enforce them on the track.
Which, to be fair, is structurally sound. Like, the people selling the broadcast rights and hyping up all the drama, they should absolutely not be the same people deciding who gets penalized for a high-speed collision.
Yeah.
You need a neutral judge.
You definitely do. But the reality of who those judges actually are is where the org chart goes completely off the rails.
Oh, completely.
Because at the very end of this regulatory chain, you have the stewards. These are the people investigating incidents in real time and handing out penalties. We are talking about a tiny panel of 4 or 5 people per race.
Right. And it's a very specific mix of people, too.
Yeah, you generally have an FIA-appointed chair, a local member from whatever host country they happen to be racing in, and then one rotating former Grand Prix driver.
And, I mean, on paper, you can kind of see the logic there. It looks like a well-rounded committee. You get international oversight, you appease the local national sporting authority by, giving them a seat at the table, and you inject direct in-the-seat racing credibility with a former driver.
But they hold immense power for a group that resets every single week. Like, these 4 or 5 individuals can change race results after the checkered flag drop.
Which is huge.
It is. They can alter championship standings, which directly impacts the distribution of hundreds of millions of dollars in prize money. And they can fundamentally alter a driver's professional reputation.
Yeah.
Yet the FIA officially classifies them as operating in an honorary capacity.
Yeah, which is just the polite corporate phrasing for a volunteer. I mean, they are largely unpaid.
It is mind-blowing. It's like assembling a jury for a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit, asking them to deliberate under a global spotlight, but it's a completely different jury every single week, and you're asking them to do it for free.
What's fascinating here is the psychological trap the leadership has built for itself.
How so?
Well, from an executive perspective, the organization is running a critical system entirely on the intrinsic motivation of these experts. I mean, the stewards are people who just love the sport.
Right. They want to be there.
Exactly. They have immense professional pride. Many are highly accomplished in their own fields, national officiating, law, consulting. They desperately want to get the calls right.
But the organization is essentially exploiting that passion to cover up a gaping structural hole, aren't they? They're drawing on top-tier professional judgment without funding the cost to actually retain it.
Spot on. And as the stakes get higher, that gap becomes a massive liability.
Hmm.
I mean, think about the basic logistics for a second. If an organization demands this level of high-stakes decision-making but refuses to pay a full-time salary, well, those individuals still have to pay their mortgages.
Right, they have to have actual day jobs.
They do. They might be lawyers representing major corporate clients or broadcasters or even motorsport consultants. The FIA recruits them specifically because they have that outside credibility and experience.
Makes sense.
But the moment they are appointed as an honorary steward, the organization has to turn around and police those exact same day jobs for conflicts of interest.
Because if you are a lawyer and your firm happens to represent a major sponsor of one of the racing teams, or if you're a broadcaster who relies on getting exclusive interviews with team principals to do your actual paying job,
Yeah,
you are inherently compromised.
exactly. And giving them a modest little weekend stipend, which they sometimes get, does not erase that conflict.
Not at all.
A stipend is just pocket money on top of the career that is actually keeping a roof over their head. That career is the very thing generating the conflict of interest in the first place. So the executive lesson is glaring here. You just cannot ask for an exclusive, highly restrictive employment relationship while only paying for a volunteer one.
Because eventually, the reality of their outside lives is going to bleed into the work no matter how much integrity the individual has.
Precisely.
Which really makes me wonder about the actual mechanics of a Sunday afternoon. If these temporary panels are changing every single week, and these people all have totally different day jobs, how do they actually get anything done under that kind of pressure?
Yeah, it's a great question. They rely on a psychological mechanism called swift trust.
Swift trust. Okay, break that down for me. How is that different from regular trust in a workplace?
Well, in the standard corporate environment, a team builds trust over months or even years. You learn how your colleagues think, you figure out their communication quirks, you understand their baseline for risk.
Right, you get a feel for how they operate.
Exactly. But a temporary expert team doesn't have the luxury of time. So they have to perform the task before they actually know each other. They totally bypass relationship building and run entirely on a baseline confidence in the credentials sitting around the table.
So it's kind of like an emergency room team coming together for a severe trauma case. The attending physician might not know the anesthesiologist's first name, but they trust the badge on their chest and the years of medical school that badge represents.
That is a perfect parallel. And swift trust is a fantastic substitute for long-term experience, but only when the task you are doing is highly predictable.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, if you were a surgical team following a strict binary checklist, swift trust works beautifully. Blood pressure drops below X, you administer Y.
But stewarding a race, or making complex corporate compliance decisions for that matter, is almost never a binary checklist.
No, it's not. And that is exactly where the model fractures. The easy calls aren't the problem. The problem is that most of what these stewards adjudicate sits right on a subjective borderline.
Right.
They're trying to find the microscopic line between acceptable aggressive racing and a punishable offense.
Which requires massive nuance.
It requires shared judgment. A permanent team learns over a season how to weigh those borderline calls. They develop a collective intuition. But a temporary team doesn't have collective intuition. They just have 4 isolated opinions.
I want to push back on this a little bit, though, because if I'm an executive designing a regulatory system, I might actually want rotation.
Okay, why is that?
Well, if you have a fixed panel of judges sitting in that room every single week, couldn't they develop a grudge? Like, couldn't a permanent panel develop a fixed bias against a specific driver who gave them a hard time in round 1 and then carry that bias for an entire 9-month season?
That is the exact counterargument used to defend the current system, and it is entirely valid. Rotation absolutely protects independence, it prevents calcification, and it stops a panel from getting too cozy with their competitors.
Right.
But you have to look at the heavy trade-off being made. Full rotation buys you independence, but it completely bankrupts your institutional memory.
Because whatever shared judgment that specific group of 4 people manages to build over a grueling, high-pressure race weekend, it just vanishes on Sunday night.
It perishes the moment they get on their flights home. The tacit knowledge, the unspoken, nuanced understanding of why they made a specific call in a specific context, it just dies with that temporary routine.
Wow.
The structural flaw here is that the work repeats, but the people don't. And when the people don't repeat, the organization is failing its fundamental job to build memory on purpose.
And what's wild is that they don't hide their decisions. I mean, Formula One publishes written rulings for every penalty. They are incredibly transparent about the outcomes.
They are.
But according to the source material, each document just sits alone. It's an isolated PDF tied to one specific event. There is no index, there is no searchable precedent system connecting a ruling from today back to a comparable crash from 3 years ago.
So anyone trying to figure out this standard, whether it's the teams trying to build a legal defense, the drivers trying to figure out how aggressive they can actually be, or just the fans watching at home, they're left trying to reconstruct the rules from their own private memory of past races.
Which just guarantees frustration.
Oh, absolutely guarantees it.
Now, if the humans are constantly resetting and losing all this memory, my immediate thought as a manager would be to just bypass the humans entirely. Throw technology at the problem. Make the decisions objective.
It is the ultimate modern management temptation. We assume that ambiguity is just a data deficiency problem. We think if we buy enough cameras and sensors, the gray areas will just disappear.
And F1 stewards have a staggering amount of what the article calls decision architecture. They have multi-angle broadcast footage, they have team radio feeds, onboard video from literally every car. They even have live telemetry data.
They do. They can see the exact braking pressure, the throttle application, and the steering angle of every single car on the track in real time.
But wait, I need to stop you there. If they have live telemetry, which means they can see exactly when a driver hits the brakes to the millisecond or the exact degree they turn the steering wheel, how is there any subjectivity left?
Yeah.
Shouldn't the computer just be able to look at the telemetry and spit out an automated penalty? Like, car A steered 5 degrees into car B, penalty applied.
Because the data only provides the, not the intent or the threshold.
Okay, right.
Telemetry can tell you a driver braked 10 meters later than normal, but it cannot tell you if they braked late to maliciously run a rival off the road, or if they braked late because their tires were degrading, or, and this is key, if they were executing a brilliant, totally legal passing maneuver.
Oh, yeah, makes sense.
Right. Technology pre-structures the judgment so the humans aren't starting from scratch. But the judgment itself, deciding if an action crossed a subjective line, is inherently a human matter of degree.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the source material brings up a completely different sport to prove this point about technology, and it honestly blew my mind. Let's talk about the 2026 FIFA World Cup.
A phenomenal parallel. You are looking at an even more massive global scale, but with the exact same technological illusion.
Right. So unlike F1 stewards, FIFA uses full-time professional referees. They undergo years of grueling preparation. They have layered video review, the VAR system. They have unlimited money and total professionalization.
Yep.
And yet, during the quarterfinal match between Switzerland and Argentina, a massive, globally televised dispute erupted. VAR intervened and sent off Switzerland's Briel Embolo.
And this escalated far beyond fans just yelling at their televisions. This became a literal structural war between two governing bodies.
Yeah, IFAB, which is the independent historic body that actually writes and maintains the laws of soccer, came out later and admitted that the VAR protocol had been misapplied. But FIFA, the body running the tournament, publicly pushed back against their own rulemakers. FIFA defended the referee's call and essentially rejected IFA's correction.
Think about the actual mechanism of that disagreement, though. IFA argued that the VAR protocol is only supposed to be used for a clear and obvious error.
Okay.
The foul in question was a subjective, messy tangle of legs. So IFA's position was that even if it was a foul, it wasn't clear and obvious enough to trigger a technological intervention.
But FIFA looked at the exact same slow-motion replay, saw the contact, and decided it justified a red card, protocol be banned.
Which perfectly illustrates the limitation of the technology. You have two massive, highly professionalized governing institutions. They're looking at the exact same high-definition, multi-angle 4K footage.
Yeah.
And they reached completely opposite conclusions on how to apply the rules. The technology showed them the identical reality. The disagreement started after the replay stopped.
Because better tools do not guarantee consensus. They just give humans a clearer picture to argue over. Which brings us to an incredibly crucial concept mentioned in the deep dive procedural justice.
This is a cornerstone of organizational leadership and legal theory, and it extends far beyond sports.
Oh, for sure.
Leaders often think their teams just want consistency,
Yeah.
and they define consistency as delivering identical outcomes every single time.
Yeah.
But people actually understand that two situations are rarely exactly identical.
Right. Two incidents might look identical from a wide TV broadcast angle, but when you dig into the telemetry, one driver was going 15 miles an hour faster, or the track surface was wet, or one driver reacted a fraction of a second later.
So a credible regulatory system doesn't actually need to force identical outcomes. What it needs is explainable differences.
Explainable differences.
Yes. Procedural justice dictates that people will accept a ruling against them, even a devastating one, if they believe the process was neutral, and most importantly, if they understand exactly what specific fact changed the result compared to a past precedent.
They just want you to name the variable, like, we ruled this way today because of X. But you can't do that if you don't have an institutional memory to reference. If you don't know why the last panel made their decision 3 months ago, you cannot possibly explain why your decision is different today.
And without that connected precedent, you aren't explaining a difference. You just look like you are making up the rules as you go along.
So we've established that throwing technology at the problem is not a silver bullet. And we know that relying entirely on a rotating cast of volunteers creates this chaotic memory void where precedent basically goes to die.
Right.
So if you are an executive structuring a high-stakes decision-making team, how do you actually solve this?
You have to break out of the false dichotomy. Usually, when organizations face this crisis of consistency, they think they only have two choices. Choice A is a permanent, fixed panel of judges.
Which, as we discuss, risks calcification, staleness, and the perception of a targeted bias against certain competitors.
Right. And choice B is full rotation.
Which protects independence but destroys your shared judgment and institutional memory.
Neither of those extremes works for high-stakes, subjective adjudication. The solution outlined in the source is a hybrid approach. It's called a professional core model.
A professional core model. Okay, how does that actually look on an org chart?
Well, you keep the elements of rotation that add value. You absolutely keep the rotating former driver to ensure you have fresh, relevant, modern racing perspective.
Okay.
You keep the local host nation member. But you introduce a small, highly paid core of recurring international stewards who travel and work across the entire season.
Hold on, I see a massive flaw in that. You put two highly paid, permanent, authoritative experts in a room with a couple of unpaid volunteers who are just there for the weekend. Aren't those permanent core guys just going to steamroll the volunteers? Doesn't that create an elitist tier where the permanent guys just outvote everyone else anyway?
It is a totally valid concern, and managing that room dynamic definitely requires strong leadership. But the design of the professional core model isn't about giving the permanent members more voting power. It's about giving them a different mandate.
What do you mean?
The core members aren't there to outvote the temporary members. They are there to provide the missing context. You are injecting permanent memory into a temporary team.
Oh, so they serve as the anchor.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of executive management, this is the most critical takeaway of the entire deep dive. Paying this core team doesn't just compensate them for their time on Sunday. It funds the between-race work.
The invisible work.
Yes. The work a volunteer panel structurally cannot do because they have to go back to being lawyers and broadcasters on Monday morning. If you have a paid professional core, their job on Tuesday is to run thorough after-action reviews. Their job on Wednesday is to compare cases, contrast rulings, and build a massive, searchable precedent system organized by incident type.
So when the next borderline call happens, the temporary panel isn't relying on swift trust and fragmented memory.
Right.
The core member can actually pull up a database and say, look, 3 months ago, in a nearly identical situation, we penalized this driver, and here is the collective reasoning why we did it.
And if the panel decides not to penalize today, they can clearly state to the public, we are departing from the previous precedent because of this specific new fact.
Wow.
You can keep the individual votes within the room confidential to protect the stewards from harassment, but the collective reasoning becomes public, connected, and most importantly, explainable.
It earns a type of trust that just getting the call right in an isolated moment never can, because you are actually showing your math.
Paying people doesn't magically end disagreements. As we saw with the FIFA World Cup, highly paid professionals will still argue over subjective thresholds. But professionalizing the core funds the reasoning. It funds the architecture of fairness.
So what does this all mean? Let's synthesize this for you, listening right now. The core takeaways are incredibly practical for any executive or manager. First, temporary teams desperately need permanent memory. If your people rotate, Your systems have to remember for them, or you are starting from zero every single week. Second, true fairness isn't about identical outcomes. It's about explainable differences. Can you explain to your team or your clients why one situation was handled differently than another based on a specific variable?
And third, as a leader, you cannot rely purely on the intrinsic motivation of your experts to cover up structural organizational flaws. Professional pride is a really powerful engine, but it is not a substitute for a design system.
I want you to look at your own workplace or whatever organization you are a part of. Are you relying on a rotating cast of talented heroes who have to reinvent the wheel every single week? Because if there is no system to capture their shared judgment, you are sitting on a massive executive risk.
It really forces you to evaluate the foundations of your own team. But there is one final lingering question here that the source material points toward.
Oh.
It wasn't directly answered, but it is vital to think about when analyzing executive behavior.
Oh, I love a lingering question. What is it?
Consider the hidden systemic motivations behind keeping an all-volunteer model in the first place. Formula One is a remarkably wealthy, highly advanced global organization. They have fully professionalized their safety protocols, their broadcast production, their technical scrutiny of the cars. They have the money to professionalize the stewards tomorrow morning if they wanted to. I mean, the cost of a few salaries is just a rounding error for them.
Okay, so why don't they?
Well, if an organization that wealthy refuses to fully professionalize its regulatory oversight, are the commercial operators secretly benefiting from the chaos?
Whoa. Wait, really?
Think about the media landscape. Does the unpredictability, the lack of precedent, the weekly raging arguments over subjective calls, does that resulting controversy actually fuel social media engagement? Does the outrage make the entertainment product more profitable?
Are they keeping the regulatory system structurally fragile on purpose because the drama sells?
It is a profound question about the incentives of executive management. When consistency is bad for the algorithm, does fairness become a liability? It's something to chew on long after we wrap up here.
That is an incredible thought to end on. It brings us right back to where we started. When you look at how an organization governs itself, it's like asking a different traffic cop every week to decide what driving dangerously means on the exact same stretch of highway. Eventually, you have to wonder if the city planner just likes watching the pileups. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.